The most disturbing romantic practices of Viking clans. When we think of Vikings, our imagination often paints a picture of fierce, bearded warriors charging into battle with axes, sailing across stormy seas in beautifully carved longships, and living by a strict warrior's code. We see them as raiders and conquerors. But rarely do we consider their private lives, their romances, marriages, and intimate traditions. Yet, the Viking world was filled with complex rules about love, relationships, and family honor. And when examined closely, many of these practices can seem shocking, even disturbing, to modern eyes. In the Viking Age, which spanned roughly from the late 8th to the early 11th century, marriage was rarely about passion or personal choice. It was a strategic tool, a way for families to forge alliances, expand their influence, and consolidate power. Love might grow later, but it was seldom the reason for tying the knot. A bride was often seen as part of a transaction between clans. Her value could be measured in land, livestock, or silver, and her voice in the matter was minimal. Fathers or male guardians held the real authority in deciding her future. It was unusual for a young woman to be promised to a man she had never met, sometimes while she was still a child. The idea of courtship in the romantic sense was almost non-existent. Instead, negotiations were made, and contracts were signed, contracts that could change the political landscape of entire regions. Some Viking sagas and historical accounts even mention the unsettling practice of bride kidnapping. In this scenario, a warrior would abduct a woman, often from a rival clan, by force or cunning. She would then be held until her family agreed to marry her to her captor, sometimes in exchange for a ransom. While not universally accepted across all Viking communities, it was an acknowledged method of acquiring a wife, particularly for men whose families could not afford the steep bride price demanded for more conventional unions. For women who did marry into prominent families, life was not always secure. Rumors of infidelity could be devastating. In a society obsessed with honor and reputation, accusations, true or false, were treated with utmost seriousness. To prove a woman's innocence, she might be subjected to brutal public tests. Some of these ordeals included walking barefoot over smoldering coals, plunging her hand into boiling water, or carrying a piece of red-hot iron for a set distance. The belief was that the gods would protect the innocent from harm, but in reality, these trials were dangerous and humiliating, and failing them could mean divorce, public disgrace, loss of property, or even physical punishment. Viking marriage customs also included polygamy, though it was mostly reserved for wealthy and influential men. While many Viking men were monogamous, powerful jarls and chieftains could have multiple wives and concubines. The wives were typically the ones with full legal status, while concubines were considered secondary partners with little to no legal rights. Children from concubines could face discrimination and had to fight harder to claim inheritance or respect. This structure gave immense power to men, allowing them to discard or replace partners at will if a better political match came along. Perhaps one of the most unsettling customs was widow inheritance. When a Viking man died, his widow was sometimes treated not as an independent person but as part of his estate. This meant she could be inherited by his brother, cousin, or another male relative, regardless of her wishes. The purpose was to keep property, influence, and wealth within the family. But it stripped women of their right to decide their own futures. In such cases, personal feelings mattered little compared to clan interests. The dangers of love in Viking society weren't limited to arranged marriages or forced unions. Falling in love with the wrong person could be deadly. Relationships between members of rival families were considered acts of betrayal. If discovered, these forbidden romances could ignite bloody feuds between clans. The consequences could be exile, forced separation, or even execution. Women in such situations were often punished more harshly, as their actions were seen as dishonoring their entire family line. Adding another layer of complexity was the Viking belief in magic and the supernatural. Many Norse people believed that love could be influenced or controlled through the use of powerful runes and spells. Some of these love charms were innocent enough, but others were deeply unsettling. There are accounts of potions or rituals that required disturbing ingredients, such as animal hearts, bones, or even drops of human blood. These spells could be used to inspire passion, bind someone's loyalty, or prevent them from straying. However, accusations of using Norse magic for manipulation were serious and could destroy reputations. In some cases, those accused faced banishment or death. What's striking is how these practices were shaped by the harsh realities of Viking life. Survival in the Norse world depended on alliances, land, and loyalty. Marriages weren't just personal unions, they were political tools that could mean the difference between a clan's rise to power or its complete ruin. Love was often secondary, and individual happiness was rarely the priority. Family honor, wealth preservation, and the ability to defend one's territory took precedence over emotional fulfillment. This doesn't mean Vikings were incapable of love or tenderness. Sagas and poetry from the era reveal moments of genuine affection and devotion. There were couples who stayed faithful for life, and there were tales of men and women who risked everything for romance. Yet, these stories stand out precisely because they were rare in a world where marriage was more a contract than a commitment of the heart. Looking back, the most disturbing thing about Viking romantic practices is how normalized they were in their society. Practices like bride kidnapping, widow inheritance, and public trials for fidelity weren't considered immoral by their standards. They were simply part of the social order. For the Vikings, these customs ensured clan survival and preserved social stability, even if they came at the cost of personal freedom. Today, these traditions strike us as harsh, even barbaric, but they remind us that the Viking Age was a world of stark realities, where the line between survival and cruelty could be thin, and where love, when it existed, had to navigate a dangerous landscape of power, politics, and honor. In the end, the romantic life of the Vikings was far from the adventurous tales of passion we sometimes imagine. It was a complex, often perilous game shaped by cultural values that placed clan interests above personal desires. In such a world, love could be dangerous, and sometimes it was a risk not worth taking. When we imagine Vikings, we often see longships slicing through icy waters, warriors in wolf pelts, and roaring battles under the northern lights. But beneath the clash of swords and the songs of victory was another world of private, secretive side of Viking life that few talk about. It was a world of calculated marriages, dangerous love affairs, and traditions that could make even the bravest warrior's blood run cold. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from the late 8th to the early 11th century, was not a time where love and marriage were matters of the heart. They were matters of survival. Every union was a chess move, a way to form alliances, consolidate power, and expand influence. Marriage as a deal, not a dream. In Viking society, marriage was rarely about romance. It was a contract negotiated, signed, and sealed like a business deal. A young woman's future wasn't in her hands but in those of her father, uncle, or brother. She could be promised to a man she'd never met, sometimes before she was even old enough to understand what marriage meant. The bride's worth wasn't measured in love, but in silver, livestock, or fertile land. This wasn't cruelty by Viking standards, it was simply the way the world worked. But while arranged marriages were common, some men bypassed negotiation altogether and turned to a darker tradition. Bride kidnapping. Bride kidnapping. The marriage of force. Viking sagas whisper about warriors who would sail into enemy territory, not for gold or plunder, but for a bride. A man might abduct a woman from a rival clan and hold her until her family agreed to marry her to him, often sealing the deal with a ransom. Sometimes the woman was treated well. Other times she was little more than a bargaining chip. This practice wasn't universal, but in certain parts of the Viking world, it was considered a bold if brutal way for a man of lesser means to gain a wife without paying the heavy bride price. The sagas even mention cases where such kidnappings led to genuine affection over time. But make no mistake, these unions began with power, not passion. Trial by ordeal, proving fidelity the hard way. For women, marriage into a powerful family was no guarantee of safety. Reputation was everything in Viking society, and rumors of infidelity could destroy a life. Accused wives were sometimes forced to prove their innocence in public ordeals, dangerous tests designed to reveal divine judgment. She might be ordered to walk barefoot over burning coals, plunge her hand into boiling water, or carry a red-hot piece of iron across a set distance. The belief was that the gods would protect the innocent from harm. In reality, the scars, both physical and emotional, could last a lifetime. Failure meant more than shame. It could lead to divorce, loss of property, or in the worst cases, brutal punishment. And in this patriarchal society, the accusation alone could be as damaging as the outcome. Polygamy and concubines. Love divided while most Viking men were monogamous. The wealthy and powerful jarls, chieftains, and successful raiders could have multiple wives and concubines. The first wife usually held the highest legal status, but concubines could be numerous, often captured during raids. Children born to concubines had fewer rights, and competition among wives for influence was fierce. A favored wife could sway her husband's political decisions, while a neglected one risked being discarded if a better match appeared. Widow inheritance. A marriage without consent. Perhaps the most disturbing tradition was widow inheritance. When a man died, his widow could be inherited by his male relative, usually a brother or cousin, regardless of her wishes.